Somehow, an entire year has passed since the launch of the Resident Evil 4 remake. What can I say? Time flies when you're having fun or something like that. When this game was initially leaked to exist, I thought, oh boy, how are they possibly going to pull this one off? I mean, it's Resident Evil 4, one of the most influential games of the current millennium. No pressure or anything. But I'm a pretty big fan of Resident Evil, so when the game got announced, I was a little excited. And then when the game was released in March of 2023, I was even more so as I covered it right as it came out. Well, that's the thing with me. When a new hype game comes out and I think it's really good, it's quite easy for me to get swept up in the hype wave and make grand declarations about how good something is. Not all the time, of course, but there are a lot of examples of that I can think of. So while I've already made 6 videos focusing on Resident Evil 4 in the past, doing a 7th is worthwhile because I wanted to play RE4 Remake again and see, now that the dust has settled, what do I think of the game? I mean, I haven't gotten the chance to play it much in the last year since my schedule requires me to quickly move on to whatever I'm doing next, but in the time since then, the game has gotten some DLC too, which I want to give my thoughts on. So with that said, let's get into it. To understand what made Resident Evil 4 so great begins with 2 important points from its development. RE4 Remake was made from the same division of Capcom that made the Resident Evil 2 remake, which is one of the best games of last generation. Remaking RE2 was easy for them to envision. Take the original game on PS1 and adapt the idea into a modern third-person shooter type game. However, Resident Evil 4 is the game that grandfathered in the modern third-person shooter. Every single game that looks like this is one that Resi 4 inspired. You simply cannot recapture something as groundbreaking as that in a remake. At the same time, you then wonder, what do we do with this project? Because Resident Evil 4 is a game widely available on just about every platform made since its original release, and is still held up as one of the greatest games ever to this day. I like how they stated it wasn't a matter of looking at other current games or later RE games and deciding to replicate them. It was instead a deep dive into the original RE4 and thinking about what ways they could expand on what was already there. But RE4 is a big-ass game. It was a multi-hour campaign as Leon exploring a village, a castle, and an island. You gotta maintain that DNA. So early in the process, the team split into 3. One that was dedicated to creating the village portion, another for the castle, and another for the island. And then comparing notes later to see how it was working out. That way, it was guaranteed that all 3 received proper attention. This game started development before the remake of Resident Evil 3 that another team handled, but I'd imagine that the lukewarm response that game got definitely convinced the team they were going in the right direction here. I've always been in a weird spot with the RE3 remake since I've never really thought it was anything more than okay, which seems to pit me at odds with RE fans who think it's overhated, and RE fans who think it's the worst thing ever. I also think it's overhated because the game is fine and has some good parts and ideas, but still, as a remake of the PS1 classic, it really dropped the ball. Several areas and bosses from the original game were nowhere to be seen, and what was in their place was absolutely not a decent replacement, like taking out the Dead Factory final level and replacing it with another generic lab. But this video is not about Resident Evil 3 Remake. I'm just saying that RE3 2020 abandoning so much of the content from the original makes it even easier to recognize how great of a move it was from the developers of RE4 to divide the team in a way that ensured each location from the original game was maintained. That doesn't mean it's a beat-for-beat remake, but it's still RE4. From there, the team looked at Resi 4 from a mechanical standpoint and thought about ways to improve the gameplay. For example, they looked at the QuickTime events and decided they wanted to remove these. But what does that mean for the iconic Krauser fight? Well, what if you instead have to time your button presses to dodge with the knife? That's pretty cool. But what if? What if that was a thing throughout the whole game, and thus the parry system was born? When enemies throw things at Leon or charge at him with their weapons or fists, correctly timing the knife button will allow you to block the attack, or just cleanly slice off the enemy combatant's arm and then you go in for a melee attack. This is so satisfying and is completely game-changing for the RE4 combat loop, when the original was already a really satisfying system of aiming for critical points to get in melee attacks, and this blends with that perfectly. The original RE4 allowed you to deflect certain projectiles by shooting them out of the air, which was already satisfying to pull off, and now you can do that for basically any incoming attack, including chainsaw-wielding enemies. I was already sold on the game from the reveal trailer, but then the first gameplay showcase revealing you could parry a chainsaw with your knife was the moment I knew this was going to be an amazing game. I just think perfect dodge mechanics add a lot to games because they require some practice to get right, which means you need to learn enemy patterns and timing and then feel like a gaming god when you execute perfectly. It is just really satisfying and never gets old. The designers said that going back to the original RE4 felt weird now because they got used to the parry system they cooked up and felt like it was missing when replaying the original game. And I can definitely say that I felt the same way when I replayed that game for this video, as it would have been really useful when getting crowded by enemies, and I even thought the same way when I played Resident Evil 5 for the first time a few weeks back. This one addition is completely game-changing if you ask me, however I don't think it stops there. In the past, I've discussed how I think Resident Evil game design can be loosely boiled down to 4 categories: resource management, tension, exploration, and replayability. How these games do these various things will differ between them, but those are the core elements. RE4 gets so much depth as an experience by taking the ways the original RE4 succeeded at those things and going even further with it. Starting with resource management, the OG RE4 did this really well because of its grid-based inventory system. You had to carefully arrange the items in your case so that they all fit, and if something couldn't fit, you had to leave it behind or use/sell the things you've been holding onto that are taking up space. RE4 was a game where ammo was everywhere though, so you never had to worry about it much. In RE4 Remake, resource management is stronger because of some new mechanics that were never in the original. You could mix herbs together for different health effects, and that's still in the new version, but new to RE4 is gunpowder mixing. You'll find resources both large and small, and these can be combined with gunpowder to create different kinds of ammo, and you'll buy recipes from the merchant to give yourself the ability to craft more varieties of ammo. Past the original Resident Evil 3, I think this is the most in-depth the gunpowder system has ever been, since I was constantly putting thought into what ammo I wanted to craft to best suit whatever situation I was in, and that's something important to RE4 Remake because ammo isn't as accessible in the world as it was in the original. You still find ammo a lot in the remake, but the amount of bullets you'd gain from this didn't feel nearly as high as the original. So you get less ammo, which means you want to conserve those resources as best you can, and you do so by making it a priority to aim for the weak spots and do melee attacks. And then you need to assess your combat needs when crafting ammo or grenades. You need to make sure your knife's durability is upgraded and repaired when broken to make sure you won't be in a situation where you can't parry, because knives break in this game like they did in the RE2 remake. This is another element of decision making I really liked about this game. How you can escape grabs by either mashing X at the cost of some health or breaking free instantly with your knife at the cost of its durability meter. It felt like a nice combination of the systems the RE2 and 3 remakes had. But anyway, the one area where I thought RE4 Remake didn't hold up as well in the resource management category was the one the original excelled at the most. You still have the same inventory system of items on a grid, but customizing your case in the original game was like a game in and of itself. Now you have this handy auto sort button that instantly configures your case to be at its most space efficient, which takes all the fun out of it. You can still organize your case independently if you really want to, but I feel like the game doesn't encourage that. In the interest of fairness, I think they did it to keep the pace up, which I get. That's also the reason why the game has real-time weapon switching when the original game only let you switch weapons by pausing the game and selecting it from your inventory. But the point is, that game just revolved around this case a lot more than the remake, which prefers keeping you in the action as much as possible. So therefore, the inventory management itself was very much lessened. But the subject of keeping you in the action leads swimmingly into the tension category. When diving into the combat mechanics, there are things I prefer in the original game, and there are things I prefer in the remake. I just went into the parrying a few moments ago, which I think transcends the original combat. But like I just said, I don't think everything is a 100% improvement on that level. But I also don't think there are definitive downgrades either, just a different system. In RE4, you couldn't move while aiming, which inherently created tension as enemies got closer and closer. But you had this laser pointer aim, which made accuracy pretty simple. Leon's hand would shake like a person's would, but I think the laser sight system made it pretty easy to be accurate is all I'm saying. In RE4 Remake, the game brings back the aiming system the RE2 Remake had. This is one where you have crosshairs that are large and they get smaller if you hold still, allowing for more accuracy. I just think this aiming system was better suited to that game than this one. In something like RE2 Remake, you're mostly fighting against slow-ass T-virus zombies, so having a shaky aim while moving that can only be steadied by stopping feels like a good balance to that. In this game, enemies move so quickly and have an abundance of attacks, so I didn't really feel like this style of aiming added much. But that leads to a system that you can complement the game for. Since there are different handguns, they have different levels of precision, and some of them can be attached with a laser pointer, and when I did that with the Punisher, I was getting a lot more headshots in. So the aiming experience can be improved while playing. All the weapons are really satisfying to use with explosive sound design and enemies getting knocked back and blown away by them. It really is a great combat system that leads to tense situations because the enemies in this game are no joke. They crowd you, they try to grab you and hold you while another enemy will try to impale you, and there's a decent variety of enemies too. Like the original, you'll still have the basic types like the villagers, cultists, and the guys who patrol the island, but now they just have more diverse weapons and tactics, scaling in difficulty too. Like how the cultists use wooden shields you can blow away with a shotgun, but when you get to the island, the enemies will have metal shields, so you can't do that and you have to aim for their legs to defeat them. The remake introduces new types of enemies not seen in the OG game, like these big guys with animal heads that take a lot of damage but are really fun to dispose of. Like this one who uses an arm-mounted rapid-fire weapon on you, you can just shoot it and make it explode, which is one of the most satisfying moments from my first playthrough of this game. You're up against some pretty fierce competition, but with all these tools at your disposal, you'll still feel like it's a fair challenge. With the more limited ammo and the darker atmosphere the game also has, this leads to an increase in the scare factor too. I love how they introduced regenerators by having you read about them and seeing their x-ray, and then when I first saw one I was like, oh shit, even though I knew it was coming. Though, on my first playthrough, aiming for those Plagas weak spots with the X-ray scope was the first moment where I felt like the aiming wasn't precise enough for my liking, but I had a much easier time with it on this playthrough than I did last year, which also goes for the whole game, I suppose. Upon the replay, I felt like the game's Ashley system was kind of a strategic downgrade. In the original, she had one of three states: following you exactly, standing completely in place, or hiding whenever that was an option. In the remake, they made her AI a little more real, and that you could have her closely follow you or hang back while trying to stay out of trouble. When the game first came out, I thought this was pretty exciting since that meant you couldn't just have her freeze in place whenever it would be convenient. However, her AI being so predictable in the original made it easier to work with. Now, I don't even see the point of having her hang back because she can only take 2 hits before dying, so making Ashley follow you closely is the best way to avoid that happening. She also doesn't have a health bar you can increase like you could in the original, so that's another bit of strategy taken out. And she still is allowed to hide in sections that'll be too hectic, like when you're attacked by the twin chainsaw ladies. Which makes sense, but still, I just think the way the OG game handled it was more of an active part of the game and your strategy, when now she's just kinda there. She'd get grabbed sometimes, but it's pretty easy to stop that. With the way the remake handles it, it's like a weird middling point between RE4, where you need to strategically think about what Ashley should be doing at all times, and something like The Last of Us, where Ellie is an aid to you that almost never gets in trouble. Not really having the strengths of either one. But I'm not saying that's some game-breaking issue, I just thought that was one area where the original gave you more to think about and plan around. But speaking of The Last of Us, the new stealth mechanics in RE4 Remake remind me of those games, as does the HUD and the UI. But I think RE4's stealth doesn't really do much for the game, as Leon isn't very mobile when sneaking around, so oftentimes it would be impractical to do so when shooting is much easier and basically an inevitability in just about every room. But now I'm just rambling about my thoughts on all the mechanics, so let's get back to the core pillars of RE. In regards to the exploration factor of RE4 Remake, this is a category where the developers really cooked with fire. Numerous segments have been expanded to give players more to work with and look around for. For example, in the original game, you could get back on the lake after the monster fight and look around, though there wasn't a lot to see here. But in the remake, there's a whole main quest of gathering pieces to get to the church, but also plenty to find by driving this boat to little spots in the water like finding a golden egg or going to this ship and finding a free red 9 in a chest. This game consistently was a more rewarding experience in terms of exploration. The original game was pretty linear, and while the remake also is, there's a benefit to exploring previously unexplored areas. When you first get to the village, there's this building you can't get into, and you return with Ashley to give her a boost so she can open the door and you can find what's inside. You can return to the chief's house and do the same thing to get into the attic. The remake injects that classic RE exploration into the RE4 experience, and I'm absolutely here for it. The OG game had a system where certain treasures could be combined with gems to enhance their value, and the remake really expanded on this by giving you different bonuses for gem color combos and by making more treasures customizable like this, which adds more depth to the system. The merchant in his shop has been enhanced as you still sell, buy, and upgrade weapons, but you can also do these side quests for him where you get spinels for completing them that you use to trade for high value items like the TMP stock that absorbs recoil. This forces you to look around or fight a tough enemy or explore an area you might otherwise not look through, like how you battle a big knight armor enemy in the Ashley section of the castle if you decide to explore it thoroughly as Leon. This sense of exploration is a consistent factor throughout the whole game. Then some select merchant shops have the shooting gallery game from the original brought back, only expanded to reward you with these tokens that can be used to get these tiny add-ons to your inventory case for special perks, giving this system more of a rewarding feeling than it used to have. Needless to say, the team did a really great job with the exploration element of the game. Though, talking about exploration merits a mention of the yellow paint controversy. RE4 Remake routinely guides players by having interactable objects and progression points dumped with yellow paint to make sure it grabs your attention and separates it from the things that are not interactable. This has made some people mighty upset. It became a meme when RE4 did it so much, but then became more so when the recently released Final Fantasy VII Rebirth also did this. Games from, say, 20 years ago, or even like 10 to 15 years ago, were able to do this subtly because non-interactable objects were even lower res than the rest of the game already was, which made it easy to ignore if you were playing it. But now, when everything is detailed realistically, devs need to find ways to make sure most every player can get through the game. You're probably going to keep seeing yellow paint because, as this tweet put it really succinctly, RE4 Remake put yellow paint into the lexicon of gaming. Anything that is not already there needs to be explained, but now you're primed to know what this means when you see it. I can see all sides of the argument here, but I would first like to say that I believe a lot of people who are venomously angry about yellow paint on Twitter are usually the kinds of people who just use it as an excuse to jerk themselves off for being superior beings to those damn normies who ruin my games. Why can't devs just cater to people who aren't stupid? When, if you're a designer, you playtest games with people who don't know anything about what you're making and use that to make sure the game is fair and balanced and to find blind spots that they or a series veteran might overlook. I just always have a problem with hipster gamers touting how superior they are to random people they've never met. It drives me crazy to no end. I wanted to call it out. But that's not to say that because this is a solution to the problem of player guidance, it automatically is good. It's possible to guide players around in games in ways that are infinitely more subtle than this. Take The Last of Us as an example again, and you can get a sense of what I mean. In those games, players are discouraged from going places they aren't supposed to by having those buildings be in ruins, entrances blocked by debris or plant overgrowth. That way you naturally go on the main path or explore side paths that are available. Now, not every game has the easy excuse of taking place 20 years after the fall of society, but it is an example nevertheless. The longer I played the game, the yellow paint got funnier and funnier because at a certain point you have to ask, who even painted the clock tower with yellow paint anyway? I'm just picturing the merchant thinking this was the only way to lead customers to his store or some shit. Interestingly, it ends up being a reminder that you're in a video game world, betraying the graphical style the game goes for. But on the other hand, I'm not someone who cares that much. When you have a game this fun and well made with all this much depth as an experience, this just becomes a passing footnote. But I'm getting mildly off subject. The last pillar of RE to me is replay value, something this game does quite well. The game keeps a good pace and offers rankings and stat breakdowns for every chapter and the whole game. Apparently, getting an S requires beating the entire game in under 5 hours. It took me 10 hours for this playthrough, so I don't know if I'll ever pull that one off, but then in-game, the designers considered all kinds of ways to make the game worth revisiting. Like how you can skip the in-game scenes where Hunnigan and Leon are talking over the communicator, or how the game is loaded with details that show how much thought and care went into it. We all know the opening village fight ends when Ada rings the bell at the church, but if you have the right weapons, you can actually end the fight early by shooting the bell yourself from really far away. Or how this scene in the castle will normally involve an enemy pulling a switch that brings you down to this huge room with dozens of enemies that can be pretty tough. But if you have explosive mines, you can place it so that it kills the switch pulling enemy before he even does it, allowing you to quickly grab the item and go. These kinds of details are only in a game that had a lot of time, care, and thought put into it. And dare I say, soul even. And that's just me talking about the base game we got a year ago. I think this game absolutely stands tall when you take the hype out of the equation, and I was glad to see it. But then the replayability was furthered by the DLC. A little bit after launch, we got the Mercenaries mode completely for free, and then later the game was given an update for the PSVR 2 and a paid-for Separate Ways campaign. I loved playing the original RE4 in VR and would love to try this game too, but I don't have a PSVR and definitely won't be getting one with how expensive it is, so I'll just talk about the DLC I do have. The Mercenaries mode is a lot of fun in the original RE4, but this is just way better. The rules are basically the same, killing as many enemies as possible within the time limit and extending the time with item pickups, but it's been changed to make it a lot more fun because you have more characters to play as. Leon, Luis, Hunk, Krauser, Ada, and Wesker. Each character has their own limited roster of weapons, so you need to work with that and find which character you like playing as the most. But I liked every character for what unique elements they brought to the table, like how Krauser can just go combo mad with the knife attacks, or how Wesker can use his superpowers to just dodge everything with his bare hands and teleport to enemies for melee attacks. And then when his gauge fills up, you can become even faster and have more attacks, like turning Krauser into his monster form and just flying through enemies. I've gotten like over 100 enemies in one combo while playing this numerous times. I think this is the Mercenaries mode I had the most fun playing. Sometimes I just turn this game on for this mode alone and play it for over half an hour. It's really addicting. And then there's the Separate Ways campaign. I was really excited to see them bring this back because I never liked the original one very much. Separate Ways was a campaign starring Ada that was added to the PS2 release of RE4 to give it a little extra something to make it worth buying. It was pretty clearly just made using level assets that already existed with some minimal new segments. Now, the new Separate Ways is also an asset flip in many respects, however it feels more original. Already I was hyped by this campaign when I heard the menu use this remix of the RE2 PS1 Ada theme. That was pretty cool. But then when you play it, Ada's pretty fun to work with. The Separate Ways campaign comes with all the same great systems from the remake like the side quests and the weapon upgrades and such. And then Ada herself plays pretty similarly to Leon, though I really enjoyed how her grapple gun is now something that she can use in combat as you can grapple up to enemies from far away or tear their shields down. And there will be many new segments included that were not in the remake's Leon campaign. The developers used this as a chance to bring back segments from the original game that were not in the remake, like the U3 boss fight, an extended tour of the castle sewers with the bugs, or the spike wall chase, or the lift with the enemies on it. They even brought back the laser room from the OG game and made it kind of a reference to the original live-action RE movie, which was pretty cool. Resident Evil 4 was a pretty long game, and so cutting some of those segments and placing them in the other campaign does wonders for the pacing of both, I'd say. It allows the main campaign to not feel like it overstays its welcome at all, and it allows separate ways to feel more like a fleshed out campaign by having more content. The original never felt like a proper campaign with its own story to tell, it was just what was Ada doing at this point of the story. Whereas the remake gives Ada an arc and an enemy to fight. She was infected with Las Plagas right at the beginning and is chased by this huge enemy, giving her a nemesis figure and a struggle to overcome while still working for Wesker and trying to get the Amber from Luis. She wants to help Luis aid Leon because deep down she cares, and gradually questions Wesker more and more throughout the story. A detail right from the beginning I liked was how Ada says she's done many missions without question, but Raccoon City changed her. Leon made her a more empathetic person, and after this mission she refuses to give Wesker the Amber because he's going to use it in his scheme to kill billions. But the ending teases that he doesn't even need the Amber now, he can just use Krauser's body to get what he needs. This campaign selling me on the change to Krauser's true intentions. In the OG game, he was this triple agent working for both Sadler and Wesker, but having only Ada work for Wesker and Krauser only working for Sadler makes the story simpler while also bringing it to the same conclusion and expanding on the characters along the way. Which is also how I can sum up my thoughts on the main game's story. As they stated in development, they wanted to expand on the characters. I said Ada was evidently changed by Raccoon City, but there's no better example of those events having an impact than Leon himself. RE4 Leon is famous for creating the quippy action hero Leon we're all familiar with today. The remake still gives him some good one-liners and action hero moments, so it absolutely feels like RE4 Leon, but I just like how they made the character darker. Not in an edgy way, but a realistic one given his experiences. The original Leon from RE2 and the one from RE4 always felt like different characters to me, and I don't just mean the change in voice acting. I always accepted that they were the same character, but RE4 Leon just treats being in the zombie apocalypse on his first day as a police officer in such a matter-of-fact way that it never really felt like it was that big of a deal to him, past the opening monologue of the game.
Somehow I managed to get myself involved with the incident in Raccoon City on my first day in the Force.
That is the incident with the viral outbreak, right?
I get it though. RE4 was trying to go in somewhat of a new direction, so the past wasn't going to be a big focus for the character. Credit to RE6, I felt like this was the first game where that backstory weighed on Leon as a character. But anyway, in RE4 Remake, they were able to take Leon's character from the RE2 remake and work with that to make the story even stronger. In that remake, Leon was characterized as this really nice, optimistic guy who wanted to help other people at all costs.
I want to find out what's happening here, and stop whoever's behind it. Helping people like them? That's why I joined the Force.
My mission is to take down Umbrella's entire operation. We may not make it out.
Whatever it takes to save this city. Count me in.
Being one of like 7 people who survived that night while the whole rest of the city got blown off the face of the earth is naturally something that this Leon would be upset by. In addition to all the trauma incurred by meeting so many people he couldn't save, like Marvin or Ada.
Raccoon City. You know, after the incident, the world changed. You try to save one person, 100 others die. I guess I changed too.
You? Leon S. Kennedy. You haven't changed. You just think you have.
Not to say the original RE2 Leon isn't a nice, optimistic guy, I'm just saying that I feel like the remake really expanded upon that element of the character. So now, rescuing Ashley from Los Illuminados isn't just his mission, it's also really important to him because he can't fail to save yet another person. While Leon is on the brink of death marching towards the lab with Ashley to hopefully cure themselves of Las Plagas, he's going on about how it has to be different this time, and that had a lot of dramatic weight to it that the original never had. The infection plot in general just felt more pronounced in this version. Honestly, in the original game, you'd sometimes forget Leon and Ashley were even infected at all until it becomes occasionally relevant in cutscenes, but in gameplay, Leon is fine. They don't make the infection something that gets in the way of gameplay here, but there are segments where you'll be impacted by it, which keeps the infection in your mind while playing. Plus, the scenes with Leon and Ashley being infected feel more dramatic too. Ashley has a really nice character arc in this as well. Starting the game really afraid to even jump out of a window, but Leon's daring antics to save her throughout boosts her confidence and motivates her to help and get involved in whatever limited ways she can, like tossing blue fire at the statues when you have to fight them, making her useful in the gameplay, and that makes you like the character more. Luis was done over in a similar fashion. In the OG game, he just walked in and out of the plot whenever he was useful, and then he died out of what felt like nowhere. Here, he's given more characterization and screen time, and the motivation of wanting to help Leon and Ashley to clear his conscience. He was a former Umbrella researcher, which obviously makes Leon not trust him at the start, but Luis is a genuine guy who really wants to help and is pretty useful. Also forming a gameplay connection with the player through extended team-up sections. Leon came to really respect him for everything he did for both him and Ashley. His death still felt kinda sad to watch in my second playthrough as a result. Especially after playing separate ways, where you really see how hard he worked to try and undo the damage he's done. Luis being killed by Krauser was also an improvement if you ask me. His character also came out of nowhere in the original, and then you had to fight him in the third act. But him killing a character you liked, such as Luis, makes him hateable instantly. And then you get dropped with more backstory that he was the one who gave Leon the super cool agent training between games before Krauser ended up joining Sadler for the sake of getting more power. Though, on the note of villains, I did like how we see Sadler's influence over those infected and how it works in this version of the story, but I will admit I thought the really hammy versions of Salazar and Sadler in the OG game were just more entertaining. Like, they just call Leon up and they'd riff back and forth for a bit. Where the remake does win out is the boss fights. They just took the concepts of each boss encounter and dialed it up to 11, like the village chief grabbing all the debris in the burning farm and tossing it at you. Many of these fights take advantage of your increased mobility while shooting by giving the boss fights the same treatment. Salazar is way more fun to fight with him flying all over the room and shooting projectiles than when he just stood there in the center of the room. Many bosses have been improved, like the Verdugo encounter giving you more room to work with and fight in, and the Twin Gigantes being this team up with Luis that was a lot of fun. The Krauser fight's taking advantage of the knife mechanics really well, unlike the original game where you could break the fight entirely with the knife, and then Sadler gets this massive arena that's way bigger than the fight was in the OG game. But either way, the final boss is pretty climactic as Leon defeats Sadler, and he and Ada say the thing.
I think we both know this. It's where we go our separate ways.
Narrowly escaping the island before it blows up, ending Resident Evil 4 Remake and this little look back on the game. After replaying both games recently, I was left wondering which of these I actually preferred. A year ago, I said I was leaning towards the remake because of how much it improved on the systems from the original game, but now, I don't know. I think it's really difficult for me to say which I actually like better than the other. When I replayed the original game, I was thinking that I preferred the original for how snappy it is and the controls and the shooting, and I felt like I might replay this game sooner than the remake. But then, while replaying the remake, I could not put the controller down. Whenever I'd stop a recording session, I'd be hungering for another one. So now I think both Resident Evil 4s are complete and utter masterpieces. I don't have a favorite. I think the original dev team made an all-time classic that I could play any day of the week, and the remake team took another stab at that iconic game and landed with another all-time great, worthy of the accolades it received. Games like RE4 Remake are why I don't definitively say what games should or should not receive remakes. Most said RE4 didn't need a remake before it came out. I even said it was going to be an impossible task before it got announced. But now I have two versions of this game that I think are both S-class games. These two, alongside RE2 Remake, are my favorite games in the series, with the original RE2 and the RE1 Remake following closely behind. I'm merely a fan of great games, no matter what form they come from, or if it's a remake of some already established great game. But now that the dust has settled on RE4 Remake, I do really wonder what's next for the series. Capcom has been doing RE content basically yearly since the release of Resident Evil 7 in 2017, which means that we're probably going to learn what the next game is, at least this year. I've still got my fingers crossed for the Code Veronica remake, not just because I wasn't the game's biggest fan when I did a review on it almost 2 years ago, but also because I have played it again since then. I feel like the atmosphere of that game is one of the best and most eerie in the series, and I'd love to see it get done over again. But the fact is, I think the modern RE games have almost all been absolute bangers, so I don't really care what it is next. RE5 was a cool game. A remake for that would no doubt be amazing, as would RE1 again, or just the next numbered entry. I really don't care what happens next. I just believe it will be a great game, and I look forward to hearing about it whenever we end up seeing that announcement. But as for myself, that just about covers all I'd like to say for now, so next up I'm going to be replaying and redoing some videos of my other favorite Capcom franchise. Hopefully you know the one. Whether you do or you don't, I'll leave you by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh, to heck with it. I'm feeling nice. If you made it this far in the video, you might as well get a preview of what the next thing is, because we're only going back to the sickest games of all time. Which are, of course...
Devil May Cry.